Welcome to the Understanding Your Liquid Applied Concrete Curing, Sealing, and Treatment Options conference call. My name is Vanessa, and I'll be your operator for today's call. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Later, we will conduct a question-and-answer session. During the question-and-answer session, if you have a question, you can press star, then 1 on your touch-tone phone. Please note that this conference is being recorded. And I will now turn the call over to your host, John Fouth. You may begin.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to present to you on liquid applied concrete curing, sealing, and treatment options. We've got a short time in comparison to a lengthy amount of material to cover, so I'm going to get right into it. At the end of today, I hope that you'll have a better understanding of some of the materials that are available to you, what they do and how they work, in order for you to have a better chance of optimizing your outcomes by choosing materials that are appropriate for the applications in which they're intended to be used, and of course to use them safely. A couple of disclaimers: I'm not a chemist, I'm not a professor, I'm not an engineer, and there's a lot of years of research and application that go into these materials. This is an hour-long presentation, and so most folks might, who are well versed in it, might think that it is an oversimplification or abbreviation, and I understand it is by necessity. This is a general nature webinar. It's not specific to any manufacturer's products, and I would strongly encourage everyone to educate yourselves from a variety of sources. There's a lot of good information that's out there, a lot of people who understand it very well and can give you different twists and turns on it that might be of value to you. There's no such thing as good or bad chemistries. We are oftentimes have some poor outcomes because they are chemistries that might be inappropriate for the applications in which they're used. So again, we'd like to leave you at the end of the seminar better able to choose chemistries that are appropriate for your applications. There are a lot of materials out there, and for every generality, there's an exception. There's an old saying that when you hear the sound of hoofbeats, think of horses, not zebras. This is probably more appropriate for use here in North America than it would be in Africa, but the point of the statement is don't look for the exception. We could bog this thing down for endless hours talking about every single exception, and every product that's out there is not an exception. It helps to start by using some common terms, or at least understanding the terms that we're all using. According to ACI, a curing compound is a liquid applied to the surface of newly placed concrete that retards the loss of water and, if pigmented, reflects sunlight. That is an extraordinarily broad statement, and it's not relevant unless we add some context to it. That context has to be in the form of something that's measurable. In the case of curing compounds, the measurement that is used most frequently is ASTM C309 for curing efficiency. So, using the ACI generalized term for a curing compound, guacamole would be a curing compound. It could be placed on concrete, and it could retard the loss of water. But the question is it an effective product for use as a curing compound, and will it get you concrete that is cured in order to meet its design specifications? A sealer is a liquid that is applied to the surface of hardened concrete, is colorless, is absorbed by the concrete, leaves little or nothing visible on the surface, and either prevents or decreases the penetration of liquid. To me, that's a description or of a penetrating sealer. We all know that there are also film-forming sealers. And again, this doesn't have a lot of value unless it's quantifiable and measurable. A film-forming sealer, then, in my view, is a liquid that is applied to the surface and cures on the surface of hardened concrete to prevent or decrease the penetration of liquid and reduce staining, which is one of the other values that a film former has. And then, of course, a cure and seal, a liquid that is applied to the surface of newly placed or hardened concrete that meets the requirements of ASTM C1315 using those specified test methods. We'll So as we're going through the presentation today, those are the terms as I intend to use them, and you can feel free to refer back to them at any point if you want to have an idea of what I'm talking about. So there are various product categories that fall into this presentation: curing compounds, curing seals, penetrating sealers, film forming sealers, and some high-performance coatings. And those are essentially what we just talked about in the terms that we covered. So a frequently asked question: what distinguishes a curing compound from a sealer? And it is kind of the age-old battle between moisture retention and permeability. In a cure and seal, the intention is to keep moisture in the concrete to promote full hydration in the cure effective zone. And a sealer, particularly one that is being used in exterior applications, has to be breathable enough, has to be permeable enough to allow water vapor to pass through the concrete and into the atmosphere. We'll get into reasons why that is the case. So what distinguishes a curing compound then from a cure and seal? Again, it is that balance between moisture retention and breathability. A curing compound has to meet the moisture retention specifications of ASTM C309, but again, it has to be breathable enough to allow water vapor to pass through the concrete and into the atmosphere. A cure and seal, obviously, the role of a curing compound in that top cure effective zone is to prevent that evaporation and allow the concrete to achieve its full design strength and durability. A curing compound forms a barrier. It's a film forming material to prevent that moisture from evaporating and allow the cement to fully hydrate. When should curing compounds be applied? They should be applied generally within 2 hours of the final finish. One of my biggest concerns is getting calls from either contractors or homeowners or commercial building owners saying, I'm looking for a recommendation on a good cure and seal. And I'll ask when they intend to pour the concrete. And the answer frequently is, well, we poured it last week. And that's the wrong time to be thinking about putting on a cure and seal. At that point, the evaporation in that cure effective zone has already occurred, and there's really nothing that you can do to make bad concrete good again. So curing compounds should be applied within 2 hours of the final finish to maximize moisture retention. There are some general recommendations for how far to hold the sprayer tip. Make sure that you get good coverage rates, good even coverage rates. If you think of a dried curing compound to be similar to a visqueen, visqueen that's being used to cure concrete needs to be continuous. You can't have rips and tears and holes in it, and you can't have a liquid applied curing compound that doesn't fully cover the surface as well. Do not mix your spray equipment between solvent-based curing compounds or sealers and water-based products either. These chemistries are not compatible with one another, and you may find that that incompatibility causes some problems for you. What makes it a curing compound? We referred to two specifications, performance specifications, ASTM C309 and ASTM C1315. Both of them have a component for curing efficiency. C309 allows moisture up to 0.55 kilograms per meter squared in 72 hours when applied at 200 square feet per gallon. ASTM C1315 allows 0.40. That is about a 30% increase in moisture retention. So a cure and seal is considered to be, generally speaking, a better curing product. The types that are available are based upon whether it's clear or pigmented. And in ASTM C309, the class refers to the composition, whether it's a wax or a resin-based material. In ASTM C1315, unfortunately, class refers to something completely different. It refers to its UV stability. Class A is non-yellowing, Class B moderately yellowing, Class C severely yellowing and darkening. 309 does not have a minimum solids content, whereas C1315 does. As a cure and seal with some long-term protection characteristics, it was determined that it should have a minimum solids contents to ensure that it does stay effective for a period of time. In my opinion, and again, this is an opinion, this is one of the biggest problems that contractors have with ASTM C1315 is the UV stability. Non-yellowing is based on the Gardner scale, which is determined by UV exposure in a UV chamber to simulate long-term UV exposure in exterior applications. The test is a 336-hour test, and if it passes 336 hours without yellowing and darkening, it is considered non-yellowing. What happens at hour 337 and beyond doesn't matter. This is a problem on decorative concrete in particular. As a result of the fact that sealers are applied to decorative concrete more frequently, not when the sealer is gone, but when the cosmetic and aesthetic value has diminished and needs to be enhanced, it is applied more frequently. It is often applied more heavily than intended, and it therefore stays on that concrete for longer periods of time. It doesn't have a chance to wear away. You have two different types of non-yellowing formulas out there. You have those that have resins that will yellow through UV exposure, but use UV inhibitors to prevent them from yellowing for the period of 336 hours in the Gardner test. UV inhibitors are like sponges as well. They soak up UV, and when a sponge has soaked up enough water, it can't soak up anymore, and a UV inhibitor soaks up enough UV and it can't soak up anymore. It exposes that resin then to the potential for yellowing. As a result, I like to think of non-yellowing or ASTM C1315 Class A products falling into two different categories. I like to call those that are non-yellowing because of the use of UV inhibitors as delayed yellowing. And I like to think of those that are non-yellowing Class A because the resin will not yellow as truly non-yellowing. And that's a distinction that I'm sure that everyone has run across from time to time. Why did this Class A material yellow? By virtue of exposure to UV. It's because the resin itself was not UV stable, but the use of UV inhibitors to delay that yellowing theoretically to the point long enough that the resin has worn away. Sealers, unlike curing seals and curing compounds, are intended to prevent the absorption of water from the surface, but to allow that breathability for water vapor passing up through the concrete to get into the atmosphere. Penetrating sealers in particular are highly breathable, and some of them are even referred to as being fully breathable. By its nature, if it's that breathable, you can understand that it wouldn't have moisture retentive properties to keep moisture in freshly placed concrete in order for it to cure to ASTM C309 or 1315 specifications. So a penetrating sealer in particular, I'm not aware of one, maybe there's one out there, but I'm not aware of one that is a curing compound that meets a curing specification. They're designed for something completely different. A film forming cure and seal does form a barrier on the surface. It does have some moisture retentive properties, but they're not sufficient enough to meet ASTM C309 or 1315 requirements. As a result, they are good sealers, but they're not used to cure concrete. It's important to note that a film forming sealer is not just a bad curing compound. It's intended to have better breathability, better permeability than a typical curing compound or a cure and seal. Those qualities have been enhanced at the expense of its ability to cure concrete. The reason that we want to have these film-forming sealers is because they have aesthetic qualities that penetrating sealers do not, and we'll touch on those in a short while. When should sealers be applied? Most products and most manufacturers will tell you that they should be applied to concrete that's at least 14 to 28 days old. Consult the technical data sheet that the manufacturer has available for the product to get the specifics. I understand that there's great value and a rush to get onto these slabs more quickly and to apply products as quickly as possible. And you're not always going to cause harm by using materials sealers sooner than they are intended, but you're not going to maximize their benefits either. Application is similar to that of a curing compound or a cure and seal. Of course, since you're applying to an existing substrate, it needs to be clean and free of any kind of contaminants. Please use the recommended equipment that the manufacturer suggests. Again, apply uniformly without any pinholes or gaps, and do not use equipment that is dedicated to solvent or water-based products. Okay, why are these sealers, why are they required to be so breathable? Many sealers are being used in exterior applications. Exterior applications, we don't have a moisture barrier, and the slab-on-grade has access to an inexhaustible supply of moisture that's in the ground. Concrete's up to 40% void structure. It is itself a big hard sponge. Water vapor passes through it with relative ease. Water is also drawn to warmth, and even in the dead of winter, the sun comes out, it warms that top side of the concrete slab, and water vapor is drawn up through the concrete and into the atmosphere. This kind of moisture drive it can't be prevented. It's going to occur. If you have a coating that is on the surface and it is not sufficiently breathable, that water vapor will begin to condense underneath the coating, and to just like if you held a piece of cellophane over a pot of boiling water, and that water, as it condenses, will form a bit of a hydrostatic pressure, and it will pop the sealer off the surface of the concrete. At least you hope that's what will happen if that's the case, because one of the dangers is that it could pop if it's applied to a weak surface, a latent layer at the surface of the concrete slab. It could pop the top surface of your concrete off. So that disbonding or delamination appears white. And many folks can probably recall applying a cure and seal or a sealer to a concrete slab. It looks beautiful the day that you put it on. It looked beautiful when you left. It looked beautiful for 2 or 3 days. And 3 days later, your customer calls you back and says, hey, that sealer turned white. And that's usually kind of the hallmark of a non-breathable coating. Non-breathable not because the coating wasn't breathable, but because it was probably over-applied. Given enough dry film thickness and a sufficient amount of moisture coming up through the surface, this can occur to any film-forming cure and seal or sealer. So that's why manufacturers are always very concerned about application rates and maintaining an application rate that will allow the sealer to be sufficiently breathable. It's a real balancing act. Whether you have to have sufficient film for its curative or aesthetic qualities, but breathable enough not to delaminate or disbond. So be very careful not to over-apply these materials. The role of a densifier, unlike a sealer or a cure and seal or a curing compound, is to react within the capillaries and pores of concrete to form more calcium silicate hydrate gel. It increases the density and the hardness of the concrete. It reduces dusting, makes it easier to clean, and it improves the durability of those substrates, especially those like in warehouse floors that might be subject to heavy loads and vibration. There are a number of different types of densifiers out there on the market. This is probably one of the, I'm going to say, most frequently misunderstood products and product categories. They do react a little bit, some of them react a little bit differently. Those that are silicates are sodium silicates, potassium silicates, lithium silicates. The silicate is the active ingredient. The sodium, potassium, and lithium are salts that wash theoretically after use, and they're rinsed away. But folks are certainly familiar with how tenacious those salts can be if they're allowed to dry on the surface of a substrate. A colloidal silica is not a salt, has no salt component to it. As a result, that is pretty much, well, not pretty much, that is free from the development of these salts and does not have any of the same hazards associated with appearance. A lot is made about the different molecular sizes of these materials, and colloidal being a very nanoparticle. These are common terms that are thrown around these days. Sodium silicates, potassium silicates, lithium silicates, colloidal silica, they all have nanoparticles. They all have colloidal elements to them. Colloidal silica simply has a much finer range of particle size. But all of them have colloidal elements to them. By the way, the silicate molecule is by far the larger portion of the sodium silicate, potassium silicate, lithium silicate. And since the salt is being washed away, the salt component, the silicate that's left is what is doing, is reacting in the concrete. And so I find it hard to believe that there's much information out there that would support that there are differences in penetration. I've not seen any. I think it's kind of a theoretical assumption that has not been proven to exist. So when should densifiers be applied? Again, typically 14 to 28 days after concrete has been poured and is allowed to cure. Consult the manufacturer's data sheet. The substrates, again, need to be clean and dry. Use the manufacturer's recommended equipment and application instructions. For maximum performance, densifiers should be applied to rejection. We are used to single applications of curing compounds, of cure and seals and sealers, but in order to maximize the effectiveness, densifiers should be applied till the substrate can no longer accept any more densifier. I have seen out there that each application will reduce porosity by 15%. I don't think that there's any hard and fast rules about that. It certainly depends on the porosity of the substrate to begin with. And of course, the material that's being used, the percent solids may impact that pretty significantly. The point here being that in order to maximize its benefits as a densifier, plan to apply make several applications until you're no longer seeing any additional material absorbing into the substrate. Another common question is, are densifiers sealers? Well, if we go back to the original definition or term of a sealer, a liquid that is applied to the surface of hardened concrete, is colorless, is absorbed by concrete, leaves little or nothing on the surface, and either prevents or decreases the penetration of liquid, then yeah, I guess it's a sealer. Except that it's also not. It's densifying concrete, and densified concrete will certainly absorb less liquid. You could accomplish the same thing by making a denser finish on the concrete surface and the substrate surface. You could power trowel, you could do all sorts of things. I'm concerned when densifiers are being used interchangeably as sealers in exterior applications, because a thin layer of densified concrete at the substrate surface is concerning to me. That you could have, this is not something that we would intentionally typically want to do, either through mechanical means with the concrete finish, and I don't see why we would want to do it in a chemical, by use of a liquid applied chemical either. I think it could be, because of the constant, the availability of water vapor from the ground, especially in freeze-thaw applications. I think we'd be asking for a lot of trouble by using them in those applications and exterior applications. So a common question that folks are posed, and which I would strongly suggest that you not answer, is which is your best sealer, or which is your best cure, or which is your best fill in the blank. That open-ended question will get you into a lot of trouble, and until you know more about the application and the customer's expectations, answering that question can be very dangerous. So now I'd like to get on to the portion where we can start looking at the various characteristics that some of these chemistries have, and being able to utilize them in the best application for their performance. So I look at three different areas when it comes to product selection. The application environment. Is it newer existing concrete, interior, exterior, enclosed? What sort of local or state environmental regulations might be applicable? I look at the service environment. Again, is it going to be used outside, inside? Is it going to be exposed to contaminants, chemicals, abrasion? And most importantly, I am very concerned with customer expectations. Those expectations may be about aesthetics, which are extremely personal. They may be about service life, and they may be impacted by the concrete finish type. So let's look at these one at a time. Product selection based on application environment. Here are some environments and some choices that you might want to think about. Freshly placed concrete, a film forming curing compound. It has to be a film former. You would like for it to be effective and to meet a specification, and a curing compound that meets ASTM C309 or 1315 would be a good choice. Existing concrete, you could use a film forming sealer, you could use a penetrating sealer, you could use other types of chemistries. You're not curing concrete, so it kind of frees up your choices. Interior or enclosed job sites, think about water-based chemistries. Solvent-based materials, by their nature, pose both a health hazard from the solvent fumes, as well as a fire and explosion hazard from various ignition sources and in enclosed areas. So we will touch on that a little bit more closely in a couple of slides as well. Low temperatures and high humidity environments. for applications. Water-based materials, because they're waterborne, that water is not going to want to evaporate in a high humidity environment, nor in a low temperature. And as a result, solvent-based materials, those water-based materials will not form a film well under those conditions. And a solvent-based material is going to be relatively unaffected by the humidity and temperatures down to at least 40 degrees. Presence of absorptive materials, and you may find this in either occupied structures or structures that are further along in the construction phase, but wood, drywall, carpeting, draperies, things of that nature can absorb the odor of solvent-based products. And as a result, water-based materials would certainly be a preferable choice, or other types of high-performance floor coatings. These interior applications, we can be less concerned about the breathability and permeability because we have a water vapor under the substrate. So here are some differing application environments. We have, let me grab my little pointer here. We have exterior concrete, which is a fresh pour. So this is would require a curing compound. Interior applications, whether this is a fresh concrete or an existing concrete, doesn't matter. It's an enclosed environment with plenty of different ignition sources that might pose hazards for use of solvent-based materials. So we'd start thinking about water-based products. The types of aesthetic qualities that customers may have for exterior applications that might be achievable with solvent-based materials and not with water-based. We might be concerned about cold weather applications and high humidity. Again, that might prevent us from using water-based materials. And so each one of these application environments will impact the choices that we can make to optimize the success of our outcomes. The service environment also impacts those choices. In exterior concrete, we have issues with UV stability. We have the issue of freeze-thaw durability in at least half the country. And also we have to have in that same area, those same areas, we need to be concerned with the effect of de-icing chemicals on the concrete. Film forming sealers, film forming cure and seals, and penetrating sealers do extremely well in exterior applications. Exposure to contaminants, if you're looking for stain protection. Stain protection is primarily the area where you're going to be limited to film-forming sealers and some specialty penetrating sealers. I have it listed there as a zebra, but there are a few of them out there, and you need to be aware of the fact that they do exist. By the way, anybody with a zebra, with one of those unusual chemistries, is going to go to great lengths to try and tell you about them because they don't want them to be perceived as being run-of-the-mill products. So if you're thinking that something sounds an awful lot like an unusual product that has some performance characteristics that that products in your view that might be similar don't have, I would be surprised if that manufacturer wouldn't go to great lengths to tell you why that is, to tell you something more about their product so that it isn't lumped into that commodity category. Chemical exposures, high performance coatings, and some penetrating sealers, zebras again. Wheeled traffic, you're worried about durability and abrasion resistance. Penetrating sealers, obviously densifiers, high performance coatings. You may have, in service environments, the exterior applications. You may have on decorative types of concrete. You may have exterior applications on broom finish concrete. You can have interior applications, again, for warehousing. You may have the aesthetics required for use around pools on decorative concrete, and then you also have the exposure to pool chemicals and things of that nature. Exterior applications require UV stable materials. In northern climates, you're going to have to worry about freeze-thaw and de-icing chemicals. And in certain applications, you're going to have to be concerned with contaminants and chemical exposure. So again, there's a lot of questions when it comes to service environment in order to choose at least the right category of products to meet your application needs. In fact, you can find under one roof a whole lot of different service environments. In most of our big box stores here today, you've got automotive sections. You've seen, I'm sure, those black tire rings from the surfactants in the tires, batteries, battery acids. You've got lawn and garden chemicals. You've got home care cleaners and bleaches and things. You have greases and oils from prepared foods and animal fats. You have beverages that might be not only stains, but also chemical reactions, such as with wines. You have packaged foods, and again, pickles, the acidic materials that are not just staining issues, but also chemical reactions, mustard, ketchup, things of that nature. So under one roof, you can have a half a dozen different environmental conditions. And it's not surprising that a single product oftentimes is challenged to meet all of those differing environments and exposures. I think one of the biggest, most important factors, especially when it comes to decorative concrete, are customer expectations. But you really, in any environment, in any type of application, the bottom line is that we want to help our customers achieve the outcomes that they had identified going into it. If our customer tells us that things like high gloss is important, then film forming sealers are the materials that will enhance that characteristic the most. Color development and enhancement, also not just film formers, but specifically solvent-based film formers. There are, when you ask somebody what they think is important, we oftentimes do think about gloss and color development enhancement, but one of the reasons that we don't want to answer questions like what's your best sealer, because different people have different expectations. There are those customers out there that want a minimally changed or completely unchanged appearance to their substrate. And if that's the case, they're going to be very disappointed with the use of a foam former, or specifically a solvent-based film forming product. This is a perfect application for a water-based film former or a penetrating sealer that's going to leave the substrate as closely appearing as closely untreated as possible. If you're looking for superior freeze-thaw damage, superior protection from freeze-thaw damage, penetrating sealers are renowned for that characteristic. Stain resistance, film formers, and when it comes to lasting the longest, penetrating sealers and some other high performance coatings. So knowing what a customer is trying to achieve will go a long way to helping identify a product category that will help you meet their needs. Now let's go through these, because they are somewhat visual and aesthetic. They're easy to see. Gloss and color development. This is obviously an exposed aggregate substrate. The substrate on the left, or the portion on the left, could be treated with a densifier. It could be treated with a penetrating sealer. It could be untreated. I guess the point, though, is that that's not the appearance that a customer has in mind when they're ordering, typically when they're ordering and specifying an exposed aggregate substrate. The material on the right, which is a film-forming, solvent-based film-forming product, is likely to be more of what that customer was looking for. And so you could spend a lot of time and money making a perfect substrate, and unless you put the final product on, the most appropriate sealer to bring out and enhance the qualities that the customer has identified as being important to them, you could end up with a customer that's very disappointed and unsatisfied. The contractor that turns over a substrate that looks like the right-hand side is going to get paid. The contractor that turns over a substrate that looks somewhat like you see on the left-hand side is going to have a hard time convincing that customer that that's what they ordered. Gloss and color development. A traditional solvent-based sealer, as is shown here, right there, whoops, there we go, darkens the substrate and enhances colors. A water-based product does not. It does a little bit, but it is a night and day difference. So depending on what your customer prefers, a water-based product or a solvent-based product might be best for them. Of course, in the center here is an untreated section as a control. When it comes to water and salt repellency and de-icing chemical resistance, penetrating sealers are the high performers. Here's an example of a substrate with a saw cut, and it's been treated with a penetrating silane, and you can see that the water beads even over the saw cut. So a customer that's not concerned with appearance, but is mostly concerned with performance, and they are going to be in a climate that is going to be exposed to freeze-thaw conditions and de-icing chemicals, these are great choices for them. And then there's stain resistance. There are some very unique fluorosilane penetrating chemistries and some other products out there that do confer stain resistance in a penetrating sealer. They are very unique, and they're also very expensive. Again, those are zebras. If you were looking for stain resistance, it is commonly going to be obtained by use of some sort of a film-forming product. And stains can be from a variety of different sources. Of course, we see the staining on the right from the tannins and the decaying leaves, or some oil stains on the concrete on the left. Film-forming sealers are not all, they're not intended to be long-term protectants from staining. There is some requirement that materials be cleaned up in a reasonable period of time. So this isn't a bulletproof. Stain resistance is not stain elimination. One of the other elements, and I liken this to myself, if your customer is a little lazy like I am and they want something that lasts a long time, so it minimizes the necessity of reapplication, then penetrating sealers, by their nature, because they don't exist on the surface, they aren't exposed to UV, they aren't exposed to abrasion and weathering the same way, they do last longer. And so knowing that that's an important element for a customer will help you better meet his expectations. So let's take a look at some of those characteristics, penetrants versus film formers. Cures concrete. Penetrating products do not cure concrete. Film formers cure concrete. Stain protection with few exceptions. Penetrating chemistries do not provide stain protection on concrete. Film formers provide stain protection. Both chemistries can be UV stable. Please remember that when it comes to film formers, there are those that are UV stable and those that are not. There are those that are UV stable and non-yellowing, and then there are those that I like to call delayed yellowing. So do understand the difference, and there are ways to find out what type of a product it is that you're looking at. Water repellency, penetrants are superior with water and de-icing salt protection. Film formers are pretty good at it. Durability, penetrating sealers typically last longer. And of course, because they reside within the concrete, they are excellent in abrasion resistance. One of the other characteristics that a penetrating sealer and film former have is in terms of highlighting blemishes in concrete, because film formers also highlight some of the aesthetic qualities that people want in decorative concrete. They can also highlight those blemishes that they don't want to see. So things that are in the concrete and maybe not noticeable, they become noticeable once they are sealed with a film former. In decorative concrete in particular, a lot of the characteristics that folks are looking for for use in decorative applications are found in film forming products and not in penetrating products. Within the film formers, you have water-based and solvent-based. They both can cure concrete. They both have stain protection. Water-based products sometimes can be a bit better. They both can be UV stable. They both have good water repellency and de-icing salt protection, or de-icing chemical protection. Both last about the same period of time. They both have decent abrasion resistance. The film water-based products will again tend not to highlight the blemishes in concrete the same way that a solvent-based product does. Similarly, they do not enhance a gloss the same way. They don't darken the concrete the same way. They don't develop colors the same way. Antiquing releases, things of that nature. A water-based product also will not wet out an antiquing release the same way that a solvent-based product does. And as a result, on things like stamped concrete, solvent-based film formers are certainly the most preferred type of material being used. Both of them can lock pigments into place. Both of them can be UV stable, stain protection, and when it comes to repairability and recoatability, solvent-based products, we all are aware of the fact that they can be more prone to trouble like bubbling and stringing and cobwebbing and maybe even over-application and whitening. But they are also repairable. Because they're solvent-based, they're lacquer systems. Each time they're exposed to solvent, they will resoften. They can be redispersed. A water-based film former cannot be resolvated. Once it is cured out, applying a solvent to it will simply damage the film. And as a result, you can imagine that reapplication of a solvent-based material over an existing solvent-based material, one layer flows into the next, softens the one below it, and flows into one to the next. Putting a water repellent or a water-based product over an already water-repellent surface is more difficult. You don't get the same bite. And as a result, repairability and recoatability of water-based products is admittedly more difficult. Water-based film formers. So sometimes there are different outcomes in spite of the fact that you're using the same product on a daily basis. But each day is a little bit different. Concrete's not the same each day. The environment in which it's being used is not the same each day. The service environment in which it's being intended to be used is not the same. Customer expectations differ from job to job. So it's not surprising that if you are sticking with one product and you're trying to use it in many different types of applications and many different types of conditions, that you're going to have a variety of good and poor outcomes. You'll want to be able to be familiar enough with the choices that are out there so that you can choose products that are going to maximize the potential for good outcomes depending on today's environment, today's conditions, today's concrete mix design, today's customer and his or her expectations. So let's spend a moment talking about marketing versus science, separating fact from fiction. There's a lot of conflicting information out there. I'm sure it can be confusing, and that many of you have been confused from time to time. Those definitions, those terms, are really kind of meaningless if they aren't able to be, and they were never intended to be used as standalone terms. They were intended to be given some meaning on the basis of a specification. So those specifications may be performance-based, as in ASTM C309 and 1315 for curing efficiency. They may be specifications for a test method so that it can be, it'll yield a quantifiable measurement. And if it yields a quantifiable measurement, then one product can be compared to the next. If you're using the same test methods, and then products can be compared across brands. If you're not using the same test methods, if you're not strictly adhering to them, then measurement and comparison is very difficult. So has a product been evaluated in strict compliance with an accepted industry test method? Or has that test method been altered to game the system? You may find that some portions of a test method are used or cited, or that the test methods are listed as modified, or that it's a description of some kind of a home-brewed test method. Those should be red flags. It's saying that we're not allowing you to make that, to quantify this product's performance in a way that it can be easily measured and compared to other products that are being used in the same applications. Whether or not a test has been done in-house or by an independent lab should be meaningful. Independent laboratories are not subject to the same influences that internal laboratories are. And are the performance claims consistent with the product composition? If somebody has a composition that is similar to other materials that are out there, and yet they're claiming some extraordinarily different performance, there should be an explanation that goes along with that. Otherwise, it certainly would be reason to be suspect. Here are some of the relevant industry test methods that give you those quantifiable measurements. We've touched on ASTM C309 and 1315. Those are both test methods, the way to perform the test, as well as establishing performance requirements, as in moisture retention. Tests such as NCHRP 244, ASTM C672, ASTM C666, these are test methods that will yield a measurement or a performance. That then can be used to compare to other products that have been tested using the same test method. And you can determine for yourself which ones have superior or inferior or acceptable or not acceptable for performance. Without a standardized test method, though, think back to what the description is for a curing compound. It could include guacamole. And so unless you have a test result that is meaningful, then you could be comparing a curing compound that meets ASTM C1315 versus a bowl of guacamole. And that's not a fair comparison. And it's certainly not going to give you yield the kind of consistent results that you're looking for when it comes to applications. So also don't confuse empirical data with the anecdotal data. You know, empirical data is data that's laboratory generated as an example. It's reproducible, it's documentable, it's comparable across manufacturers and chemistries. Anecdotal data, you know, I know that we like to share our experiences with one another, but there's not a lot of value in, you know, hey, I tried it, it worked, I tried it, it didn't work. I don't know what that means. I don't know how you used it. I don't know what the conditions were in which it was used. I don't know how that compares to another product from another source. So again, those reproducible, documentable results that an industry specification and test method produces are going to allow you to make those kind of accurate comparisons. Different chemistries, what they do and don't do. You know, anytime that a chemist is trying to enhance certain qualities, he's doing so typically at the expense of other qualities. But that's how you end up with a variety of different products. They're intended for different uses and for different customer expectations. I like to think of things in three different categories. Those that are highly breathable, which would be our penetrating chemistries, those that are semi-breathable in film forming, and those that are non-breathable in film forming. And so where they fall from 100% breathable to 0 non-breathable will determine the type of application that it's suitable for. And let's take a look at a couple of those. So again, heading back to what we looked at early on, penetrating chemistries, they're highly breathable. They allow that water vapor in exterior applications to pass through the concrete and into the atmosphere while giving you protection from surface liquids and de-icing chemicals. But they don't meet curing specifications. How they work? They react within the concrete. Silanes, siloxanes, siliconates, they react to form hydrophobic silicone linings. The silicates and reactive colloidal silica react to form calcium silicate hydrate gel within the paste. What makes them highly breathable? They're not film formers. There's nothing at the surface to prevent water vapor from passing through them. And these water repellents are available in both water and solvent-based versions. So as you look across a little chart, the types of characteristics they have, all of them repel water. Densifiers aren't, it's not really the densifier itself that's repelling the water, it's simply the increased densification of the concrete. So I kind of have an asterisk there. They reduce chloride absorption. Again, densifiers, any densified concrete is going to have less absorptivity. They meet the state requirements, many DOT requirements for protection from water absorption and chloride ion absorption. Silanes, siloxanes, siliconates, silanes and siloxanes, when applied using this test method, will meet those generalized those generalized performance requirements. The siliconates and densifiers will not. Interior or exterior use, most of them can be used either interior or exterior. I have a concern about densifiers being used in exterior applications. Again, a thin densified layer at on the surface of that's subject to freeze-thaw cycling, I think is a risk. They can be used in vertical and horizontal applications. They generally don't change the appearance of the substrate, although frankly, if over-applied immensely, you can find some shadowing that could be developed with these sorts of products. Only densifiers densify in hardened concrete. They have differing types of service lives, 4 to 7 years for most of the penetrating chemistries, but 25 years plus. And sometimes some folks will say the life of the concrete for a densifier. Because it's creating more calcium silicate hydrate gel. It's more concrete paste. That paste doesn't wear out, so to speak. It's there. It stays there. And none of them cure concrete to ASTM C309 specifications. Semi-breathable products. So there's different types of chemistries involved here. They can be acrylates, methacrylates, hybridized blends. They form obviously a film on the surface. They're semi-breathable. They will allow some water vapor to pass through them, but also to prevent enough moisture and have enough moisture retention to meet curing specifications. Again, they're both available in both water and solvent-based versions. So these are available in solvent, which are thermoplastic or lacquer systems. They cure by solvent evaporation. Wide variety of resins. We've touched on some of the characteristics they have. Some of these things, these are often considered the advantages associated with solvent-based film formers. These are often considered the disadvantages. And again, there's no one product that's perfect. So everything has its advantages and disadvantages. Flammability limits these products to uses in exterior applications. It can be good and bad that they resolvate when exposed to solvents, which means they're more easily repairable, but that also means that they don't have the solvent resistance for protection in environments in which they might be frequently exposed to solvent contaminants. They highlight blemishes and stains, and they pose health risks during application through aspiration of breathing of the solvent fumes. There are a wide variety of solvent-based acrylate and methacrylate products out there. Pure methacrylates, styrene acrylics, which are, these would be oftentimes those sorts of products that would be delayed yellowing, in my view. Styrene, most people are familiar with styrene coffee cups. They have excellent curing efficiency characteristics, but that means that they have reduced breathability. They don't have very high gloss levels. Their UV stability is moderate at best because styrene is not a UV stable resin. So depending on your application and your customer expectations, styrene acrylics, siliconized acrylics, these are often valued for their aesthetic qualities, high gloss, long-lasting gloss, UV resiliency. Epoxy acrylics. Epoxy, again, is a resin that's not UV stable, so you might have some concerns in exterior applications about whether or not this would be a good choice. But they are very high gloss, and they tend to be a little less breathable because epoxy is not a highly breathable resin either. So again, applications in exterior use might be concerned about their being used there. Urethane acrylics. Urethane is very UV stable. It's very high gloss. It's good breathability. It has excellent stain resistance, but you might be concerned about materials, epoxies, urethanes, and what have you, that in regards to their recoatability and repairability. Because they have good solvent resistance, they're not going to be as easily repaired, and oftentimes an epoxy or urethane-based type material is going to require some screening or abrasion prior to reapplication. And if that's the case, and it's being used on decorative concrete, that could pose a real problem because it may harm your surface. It might be impractical as well on highly profiled types of concrete, such as exposed aggregate or stamped concrete or something of that nature. And pure acrylics, although we could almost kind of interchange them with methacrylates, in many cases they're kind of mirror image, same chemistry, and same kind of performance. It's worth mentioning volatile organic compounds, VOCs, are materials that photoreact in the atmosphere. They're associated with the creation of smog, specifically ozone. Low-level ozone is a health hazard. High-level ozone is great. It helps protect us from solar radiation. VOCs are measured in grams per liter, and the limitations differ from state to state. You should certainly know what is going on in your state. Here are some examples of what we generally term as high VOC and low VOC locations. There's not the high VOC areas that rely on federal limitations are pretty standardized. The low VOC locations are not. There's a fair amount of variability in there. And sometimes that is uniform throughout a state, but in many cases, or in some cases, and California is a good example, there may be a variety of differing limitations based on the local air quality management district, or which is often done by county. So know the regulations in your area before you choose a product. Why are VOCs important? Because of their user-friendliness, primarily, beyond the health issues. If you look at the evaporation rates of the non-exempt solvents, they all tend to be very slow evaporating with higher flash points, whereas the exempt solvents that are used, by and large, these are very fast evaporating materials and with relatively low flash points. The one product that is not is perchlorobenzyl trifluoride. For those of you in low VOC areas, I encourage you to find materials that might have PCBTF, Oxol 100, perchlorobenzyl trifluoride as a solvent. It is an aromatic solvent like the non-exempt solvents. Acetone, TBOC, dimethyl carbonate tend to be oxygenated solvents and have with completely different performance characteristics. If you're looking for something that is that works like high VOC but is legitimately low VOC, this is the type of solvent that you want to be perhaps looking for. By the way, we all read from the same hymnal on this. There is a list of exempt solvents that is published. Manufacturers are not allowed to create their own special exempt solvent. These solvents need to be disclosed on an SDS. So if there is a high-performing exempt solvent out there, it is readily available for use by any supplier that chooses to do so. Your semi-breathable water-based products, the big advantage is that they're non-flammable but can be used indoors, and that they have a minimal effect on the aesthetic qualities of concrete. And of course, in hot weather, they're non-bubbling, which is a nice advantage in exterior applications as well. Some of those advantages can be used, can be disadvantages as well. Obviously, if you don't have minimal darkening and low gloss, then for those folks that are looking for some color development and darkening of their decorative concrete or high gloss, that's not a good choice for them. But they do have improved chemical resistance versus their solvent-based brethren. Water-based options, again, they're pretty similar to what we saw in the solvent-based. There's styronated acrylics, there's epoxy acrylics, there's urethane acrylic, and there's pure acrylic. And those same performance choices or characteristics exist in the water-based materials as well. And you match up your customer expectations with the performance of the product. If gloss level is important to your customer, a styronated water-based product is probably not a good choice, as an example. And then you have non-breathable chemistries. Non-breathable chemistries, generally two-component. They're high-performance floor coatings, epoxies, MMAs, methyl methacrylates, polyaspartics, polyureas, epoxies, urethanes, epoxy urethane systems. These are wonderful products used in indoor applications. They last a long time. They have great aesthetic qualities. But because they're non-breathable, they are poor choices, generally speaking, for exterior applications. And in decorative applications, you want to be careful that you are not applying these in applications where reapplication may require a surface preparation that damages your decorative substrate. So again, if something requires removal, stripping, or if it requires a sandblasting or a shot blasting or a screening, those might be not excellent choices in a decorative application. So again, here are some performances for different types of non-breathable high-performance coatings that are out there. I threw the little zebra in there because there are some epoxies that are out there that will cure concrete. They're not common, but they're there. And again, matching these characteristics to the customer expectations, the application environment, and the service environment, that's the name of the game. Matching characteristics to the job specifically. Working safely with your products is paramount. Don't become complacent. Retain a healthy respect for the fact that you're working with chemicals. They pose health and safety risks. Doing it 1,000 times wrong doesn't mean that that's the right way to do it. It just means you were lucky 1,000 times. And think about safety before you're on the job site. Once you're on the job site, it might be too late. So it starts with, before you select a product, read and understand the manufacturer's technical data sheet. Call the manufacturer if anything is unclear. Don't call them after there's a problem. That's too late. Call them before the problem. You see something that draws your attention, they're happy to answer those questions. Those kinds of technical calls are so much better than the technical calls that result from problems that occurred because that phone call wasn't made. Make sure the product is recommended for the application and purpose in which you intend to use it. Make sure the product is recommended for the environmental conditions and application techniques you intend to employ. Make sure you understand the surface preparation requirements. Pay particular attention to the timing associated with application, and have a plan in place for your process so that everyone understands what the job is and when it needs to be done. Before you arrive at the job site, read and understand the safety data sheet. Again, if anything is unclear, call the manufacturer directly. Understand the health and safety hazards associated with using this product. Have a plan in place to address any of these hazards should they occur. If it's a flammable product and you don't have fire extinguishers on the job site, you've you're already a step behind. You got to think ahead to what you're going to need before you arrive on the job site. Understand and employ the recommended personal protective equipment. Make sure everybody on the job site is similarly informed. Just because you and your crew show up on a job site in which there's also plumbers and electricians and folks working, don't assume that you want to expose them to those hazards without making sure that they're aware of them as well. So everybody on that job site should be aware of what hazards are associated with the use of a product. Once you get to the job site and you've done those 2 steps, now take a look at that pail. Make sure that there's that you get a last reading on the application. Make sure that the label conforms with the data sheets you read previously, and make sure everybody is prepared for use of that product. And be very, very careful of the fact that solvent-based products are flammable. They are all flammable, and some of these things have fumes that are heavier than air, so do not use them in indoors and enclosed environments. Even if it doesn't have this big red diamond on it, it doesn't mean it's not flammable. This is an icon that's used for shipping purposes. It's not intended to mean that an absence of it means that it's not a flammable material. And I know I've gone significantly over the time allotted, and it probably seemed too quick anyway, but I appreciate your time and attention, and more than happy to answer any questions that folks have. Thank you very much for your patience.
And thank you, sir. We will now take your questions. If you would like to queue up with a question, please press star, then 1 on your touch-tone phone. Once again, if you have a question, please press star, then 1, and I'm standing by for questions. I am sorry, I do not see any questions in queue at this time.
Well, thank you very much for your time, everyone. I sincerely appreciate it and hope you found it informative and entertaining.
And thank you, sir. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This concludes today's conference. We thank you for